That was a nice move by Pipkins, taking it right to the rack himself.
Wide open three, left wing, and it's good.
Nylon, the dunk likes that, Matt.
A three from the right side, and it's good! The one, Pipkins, the man, yet again.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Flex. This is Joe Howie.
And I'm Matt St. Jean.
And tonight we will be continuing with our Big East preseason coaches rankings breakdown with the number 6th ranked Marquette Golden Eagles. Now, the Marquette Golden Eagles come into this season boasting what hopes to be the most interesting off-season recovery of any team in the Big East. And we'll get to that in a second because I'm sure most of you know what we're going to talk about. But let's start with the man at the top, Steve Wojciechowski, Wojo for short, the 44-year-old head coach with the temperament of a toddler. Now, unbiased, of course. Wojo has been
your
the head.
opinion there.
I'll give some brief comments, but I'll give everyone some statistical facts about Wojo. He's been the head coach at Marquette since 2014 after serving under Coach K at Duke since 1999. In the 2020 season, he ended the Marquette season by losing 6 of their last 7 games. Woof. They finished 8-10 in the Big East and 18-12 overall. Now, I'm sure you're thinking that, for Marquette with a team with a talented player like Markus Howard, how could you do that? Well, with Wojo's brilliant offensive system running 90% of your plays through one player, what happens when he gets double teamed? What happens when you run into a tough defense? Well, the other guys that don't really get to touch the ball, they have to touch the ball. So that kind of takes care of itself. But aside from Markus Howard, because we will talk about him a little more in depth in a minute, there are a few other key losses defensively for Marquette that are going to hurt them in Sakar Annam, Brendan Bailey, Ed Morrow, and Jace Jawson. Sakar Annam and Brendan Bailey were 2 wing guards, a couple of matchup nightmares, if I do say so myself. Annam was the only other player on the team besides Markus Howard to score in double digits. Brendan Bailey was a long guard. He was great on defense, upset a lot of guards, AJ Reeves specifically from the Providence Friars. Ed Morrow and Jace Jawson served as backups to Theo John, who we will talk about extensively later on. But they were key off the bench because when the Hulk Theo John was getting a breather with his sippy cup on the sideline, these two guys were actually doing real work in the paint and were actually tough to play against. Now, the man we've all been waiting for, Markus Howard. He averaged just under 30 points for the Golden Eagles last season and only 3 assists. Now, as a point guard who gets as many minutes as he does, 3 assists, it just flat out sucks. I mean, he wasn't distributing the ball. We know why. Last season, he took nearly 30 shots per game with a total of 561 field goal attempts for the entire season. For comparison, Alpha Diallo, who led the Friars, took 374, and Miles Powell, who led the Seton Hall Pirates, who won Big East Player of the Year, only took 490.
Yeah,
Matt,
I mean, this is something
obviously,
when you
go ahead.
I mean, when you look at the stats, it's obvious. Like points, you've got Markus Howard 806 points last year. Miles Powell, who is obviously a very good player, 589. Just that massive gap. And if you look at the KenPom rankings, Markus Howard was first for percentage of possessions used and first for percentage of shots taken in all of college basketball.
I mean, he was the most heavily used player in the country last season. And hey, this is in no way to disrespect him because if I played one-on-one against Markus Howard, he would beat me 200-5. I'm not even kidding. He is very, very talented, and there's no disrespect towards him. But what I think we're trying to create here is the narrative of the coach, and that's Steve Wojo, and the way that he used Markus Howard. So let's rewind the clocks to the end of the 2018-2019 season. Markus Howard is testing the NBA waters. The day he decides that he's going to return to Marquette for his senior year, the Hauser brothers decide to leave. I wonder why. I mean, the Hauser brothers, just like Markus Howard, had their way at Marquette. They started, saw a ton of playing time, got whatever shots they wanted. But when Markus Howard said he was returning, they said they didn't want to be a part of the program anymore. Now, I'm sure it's not because Marcus Howard's a jerk. I actually think he was one of the classier players in the Big East. This goes, once again, back to Steve Wojciechowski and his system. With Marcus Howard on that roster, it's the Marcus Howard show. And when you have two talented players like the Hauser brothers who decide to leave your program when they basically have free reign all over the court, I think that speaks volumes to the coaching style that Wojciechowski has built over the past 4 years.
Yeah,
Now,
and if
yeah, go ahead.
Marquette is going to, if they're going to win this year, it's certainly going to have to come from a change in style because you got a guy like DJ Carton coming in to attempt to replace Marcus Howard. But even if you had one of the single best players in the country coming in at usage rates that high, it's very hard to replicate what Marcus Howard was able to do. So that's where you look at those depth guys that Marquette loses, and you start to see some question marks on the roster. If they're trying, I mean, if you're trying to go through one guy, Marquette doesn't have that one guy anymore. And if it's going to be a team-based approach, quite frankly, I don't know if they have the depth to be in the top tier of the Big East this season.
I completely agree, Matt. And just for comparison, Marquette does not return one player from their roster that wore the gold and blue last year that scored over double digits. One team with the same statistic is Butler, and Butler is ranked 3 spots lower than Marquette. Now, given Marquette does bring in a couple of highly touted transfers and a nationally ranked top recruiting class, which, Matt, do you want to talk about a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think we could talk about DJ Carton. He's going to run the show for them this year. He played at Ohio State. He's going to be in his sophomore year now, but as a freshman at Ohio State, he averaged double-digit points per game, as well as 3 assists per game. And you've got Dawson Garcia is probably the headliner of this class for them. One of the top forwards or centers, however you want to classify him, in all of college basketball as a recruit, 36th nationally. He's 6'11", and he can do a lot. He can shoot well. He can score. He's thin, and he's 6'11", and he's probably going to play the 4 for them this year, which you don't see a lot from somebody that's 6'11". Then you got 2 other 4-star recruits coming in: Justin Lewis, the forward out of Baltimore, and I'm going to butcher this name, Osaseri Iguodaro from Phoenix,
Sounds good to me.
126th ranked. Yeah, 126th ranked nationally. So if Wojciechowski is going to find a new way to do this without a guy like Marcus Howard, having 3 4-stars plus a former 4-star recruit in DJ Carton transfer in to your team is a pretty good way to replace that.
Yeah, it certainly helps the Wojciechowski cause, and he's going to need all the help he can get because I can't stress this enough. When you run 90% of your offense through one person, it's going to suffer the following year. But there are a couple of returners from Marquette in Kobe McEwen, Jamal Cain, and Theo John, who are projected to start, according to various sources across the internet. Kobe McEwen comes in at 6'4". Oh, don't worry, we'll get to him. I know you're waiting for him.
I can't wait.
Kobe McEwen comes in at 6'4", averaging just under 10 a game with 5 rebounds. Jamal Cain comes in at 6'7", just over 5 with 4.5 rebounds. And big bad Theo John. He's the starting center that you never wanted. He comes in at 6'9". I mean, you look at him, he's got these huge rounded shoulders. He looks like the Hulk, but he's like this big, intimidating guy. He's slamming dunks in the pregame warm-ups. He'll put up 5 points a game, 5 rebounds, a couple of blocks, 3 turnovers, and maybe 2 or 3 goaltends if we're lucky. He is the most intimidating yet the sloppiest 5-man in the Big East. It gets to the point where I like it when he's on the court because Nate Watson and last year Khalif Young could just slip right by him right to the cup. It was like a revolving door under the hoop. It was, oh my God, Matt, do you want to talk about Theo John a little bit?
No, I mean, I think the Hulk is the great way to describe him. He plays with a lot of energy. He's built, and he'll be an impact player at both ends of the floor for both good and bad reasons for Marquette. He's third. He was third in the Big East last year in blocks, and the 2 guys ahead of him have left. That was Romaro Gill and Paul Reed. So he's a guy that'll make that. He'll swat the ball. Who's going to make things difficult for you down low, but endurance has definitely been an issue for him. He struggles late in games. He's not mentally sound most of the time on the floor. And I think he's a guy you want to be more of a role player. And I think that's something you see with all of your veterans in this lineup. I mean, Theo John's probably at his best coming off the bench. DJ Carton is a guy who as a freshman played 24 minutes a game. Now you're going to take him in his second year and ask him to be the starting point guard. That's a pretty big jump to ask for somebody. Or Kobe McEwen, he played about 30 minutes a game for most of his career, whether it be at Utah State or at Marquette. He can handle minutes, but now he's going to be asked to be the number 2 in this offense. That's a big step up. And I think this is a theme you see around the Big East. Obviously, you see it in college sports. Guys graduate, and your guys have to take that next step up. I don't see Kobe McEwen, Jamal Cain, or Theo John as guys that are going to take that next step up. I think these are all complementary players that work best around a more complete team, which next year, I think Marquette might have that. You'll have DJ Carton returning, and you'll have all of these freshmen with that year of experience really starting to put things together. I don't think you can build a team around the 3 of them this year.
Yeah, Matt, I really like that point you just brought up. You can't really build a team around 3 guys that played a lighter role in the Markus Howard show. And it's just to compare to last season's roster, Kobe McEwen has to replace Sakar Anim as the number 2 guy. And while Markus Howard was the king of the show, Sakar Anim was a good player. He was tough on defense, and he was the only other player on the team to average double digits. So that's a big set of shoes to fill. And you got DJ Carton, who, by the way, I really like watching him play. His highlights are incredible. He can get it off the bounce. He can pass. He's a great jump shooter.
Oh, he's fantastic.
I really like him, and it's going to be fun to watch him play in the Big East. But with that said, he has not played one tick of Big East basketball. So it's a tougher league than a lot of the big major schools. I mean, the Big East is a lot more physical than these other power conferences. So there will be a learning curve, of course, as there is with all transfers. They don't just come in and thrive. I mean, we saw it very well with Providence's Luwan Pipkins. These guards that come in from different conferences, they take a beating their first couple of games in the Big East. I hope for his sake that he figures it out because I like watching him play, and I think he'll be a really nice piece for this Marquette offense. But for right now, the shoes of Markus Howard are empty, and he really needs to fill them.
Yeah. No, I think we might be being a tad harsh on Marquette here. There's a reason they're picked to be in the middle of the Big East, and I don't think it's impossible for Marquette to be good. I think it is important to note that Markus Howard was a liability on defense, and they're certainly going to improve at that end of the floor. And if Theo John's at the 5, then you can have a freshman like Dawson Garcia, who's still filling out his frame and getting to Big East size. He's protected a little bit. He doesn't have to go down low and do all of the nitty gritty. And Theo John's good on defense. He protects you and can save you from some of that freshman inexperience a little bit there.
And goaltends.
Yes. But, I mean, Kobe McEwen is a guy who had a 7-game streak in Big East play last year where he scored double-digit points. If he can return to that form, if DJ Carton can come in and hit what Luwan Pipkins eventually did, then all of a sudden, you can't replace Markus Howard's scoring, but DJ Carton's a lot better on the defensive end of the floor. A lot of these guys are better on the defensive end of the floor, so you might be able to make up for that 30 points a game that he's going to get, Markus Howard gave you. You might be able to get 20 of them on offense and get 10 points at the other end of the floor on defense, and you're in some basketball games. Now, this is going to be a referendum on Wojciechowski as a coach the next 2-3 seasons. I know I'm personally not super high on him. I don't think you are either. And this is a team that desperately needs leadership and consistency, which I don't think you're going to see. But I do think Marquette is good enough to compete in the Big East and to finish somewhere in the middle. I think they're one of those teams that'll be really, really streaky.
I agree with that, Matt. I think they're going to be a streaky team. And the point you made about Wojciechowski this season and the next handful of seasons, all eyes are on him. If you're a Marquette fan, if you're in the administration at Marquette, all eyes are on him because prior to the Markus Howard era, Marquette didn't really make a lot of noise in the Big East. And Wojciechowski, he's gained a lot of spotlight because of Markus Howard. And I mean, what has he really done in that spotlight except upset players and coaches in the Big East? I mean, when he wins, he's a jerk, and he wins. He's a sore winner, and he's a sore loser. When he wins, he'll exchange pleasantries like he hasn't seen you in years across midcourt at the end of the game. When he loses, he brushes by you, gives you the cheapest little handshake. I mean, just thinking back to the 2018-2019 Big East tournament semifinal game when Seton Hall upset top-ranked Marquette, and I don't know, there were somewhat 80 fouls called that game. Wojo refused to shake Miles Powell's hand in the end of the game handshake. He refused to shake his hand. Miles Powell called him out on it. Wojo turned around, and Miles Powell was like, "Nope, you can't do it now," and went running into the locker room. Now, Miles Powell should have shut his mouth and kept going, but you're a coach in the Big East. Have some class. I mean, shake the guy's hand and win with class. You're going to the NCAA tournament anyway. Just because you didn't win the Big East tournament doesn't mean that your season's over. And then he shut down his locker room, which, by the way, is you're not allowed to do that in the Big East tournament. You have to keep your locker room open for the media. He shut it down so him and his team could go suck their thumb. I mean, he's not a great guy. Inside sources from the Providence basketball team have revealed that coaches around the Big East don't like him. They don't like talking to him. They don't like exchanging pleasantries with him before or after the game. He's someone that they want to beat. Players don't like him. Coaches don't like him. You want to beat him. And now, when you have this young lineup, he's got a target on his back.
Yeah. No, I think it makes it fun as a fan. Because if you're setting up villains in the Big East, I think Villanova's obviously your number one, and they win. They win with class. They're the that's a good one.
Sometimes they win with class.
Yeah, but they're
We'll
a
get to that
well-run
later.
program. Yeah, they're the villains because they win, and everybody wants to beat them, and they've got a target on their back every single Big East game. Then this year you're gonna have UConn. We're gonna get to them too, but with all of the history they have with this conference. They don't have the history with Butler or Creighton or some of those teams, but Providence and St. John's and Seton Hall, Villanova, they all know what went down with UConn. But Marquette gives you that other natural rivalry. You got Wojciechowski, who's not particularly well liked, Theo John as such an aggressive player. And I mean, guys like DJ Carton's a physical player. He could emerge into that kind of the villain role where you love to watch him play, but you hate to watch him win if you're a Big East fan. And as a college basketball fan, it's not fun unless you have those teams.
Who was that guy on Xavier a few years ago? Number 55.
J.P. McCura?
He played with. Yes. DJ Carton can very easily fill the J.P. McCura role. He's the guy you hate to play against. He's cocky, he showboats, but he's a hell of a player. But you'd love to have him on your team, or like a Kyron Cartwright.
Let's just hope DJ Carton doesn't get into legal trouble the same way McCura did.
No, McCura is kind of a stretch. I realized that as I was going on, but you know what I mean. He's the guy you love to have on your roster. You hate to play against.
Yeah, and you look at a guy like Dawson Garcia, a thin 6'11" guy who plays the 4 and can shoot threes. That's the kind of guy who as a fan, you're going to watch it. You're going to watch your team play, and you're going to see him hit a 3 in your face to win a game at some point or steal a game, and you're going to be saying, how in the world did we just let a 6'11" kid with arms that are like McDonald's French fries beat us with a 3? But it'll happen. And that's how these rivalries get built.
He's a freshman. He's going to get a lot of tick this year. Let me tell you, he is going to see a lot of time on the court.
Yeah, he's in the starting lineup.
Obviously he's in their starting lineup. But last year Theo John would come out of the game for Jace Jawson and Ed Morrow, who were the backup centers, 4 and 5 respectively. However you want to call them, they would come in and play minutes at the 5. now you've got a 6'11 guy starting at the 4 who's likely going to get minutes at the 5. But I think we've already exhausted the Theo John point. Matt, we do have a schedule going forward, a rather longer schedule. Would you like to go through that?
For Marquette, let me bring it up
Yes.
here in front of me. All right. Yeah, they're going to start off against Arkansas Pine Bluff. They got Powerhouse Eastern Illinois right after them. Then things get difficult. Oklahoma State and Wisconsin, both of those games at Marquette. Then Green Bay, and then at UCLA before Big East play starts, where they travel to Omaha to take on Creighton. Certainly an interesting non-conference there, highlighted by 3 games against top 40 teams in Oklahoma State, Wisconsin, and UCLA. And I should mention, in the preseason rankings, Ken Pomeroy has Marquette at 34, which is very high. Joe, what are your thoughts on everything that I just put out there?
I think having them at 34 is awfully generous. I mean,
it's third
again,
in the Big East.
Statistics, I understand it. You dive a little deeper into the Big East, which I'm sure Ken Pomeroy does not do, like us. You dive a little deeper, and I think that's a little generous. In terms of their non-conference, I could see them going 500, maybe just over 500. But then let's talk about this stretch of games at UCLA, at Creighton versus Seton Hall. Woof, that is a doozy of a 3-game stretch there. You got 2 really tough road games. You open Big East play at Creighton, who's the defending, I guess you can call them the defending Big East champs because they outright won the conference. I mean, they were tied with Hall and Nova, but they were given the 1 seed in the tournament, whatever. And then you go to Seton Hall. So that's a 3-game stretch where they're really going to need to be tough defensively. And as we said before, no Markus Howard means likely an increase in defensive tempo for this team.
Yeah. And not only that, I mean, if you've got a new point guard, we're talking about what happened with Lawan Pipkins for Providence last year, where it took a while for him to adjust. Well, games 3 and 4 of the season are against top 40 teams, and then game 6 is against the top 40 team, and then you're in conference play. You don't have a buffer, you don't have a window to get yourself going. You got to hit the ground running. You've got 2 games that you should win to figure your offense out, and then you're playing good teams, and you got to make it work. So they're going to be tested very early.
Not to mention, they lost some preseason time due to COVID. So they're coming into this season hot with a fiery schedule, and they also lost practice time. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see the way this Golden Eagles squad takes the 2020-2021 season. A big test year for Steve Wojciechowski, but Matt, any closing thoughts?
I'm just intrigued to see what we get from them. I think they're going to be one of the more inconsistent teams in what I'm guessing will be a highly competitive and largely inconsistent Big East.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Looking forward to watching Steve Wojciechowski give some cheap handshakes at the end of game pleasantries. For Matt St. Jean, this is Joe Howie. You can follow along with us at the Flex Hoops on Twitter, or at Matt St. Dream, or at Joe Howie. Thank you for joining us. Good night.